I want to talk a little bit about price as a strategy. I know we talk about price a lot, but it's a super important part of the strategy. In fact, aside from selecting the agent, price is the single most important decision a seller makes when they decide to sell their house. You guys agree with that? I mean, it's a very important decision. So I like talking about it from different perspectives. So maybe you hear it a little differently. So this morning, I just whipped together a little something called the pricing strategy. So listen, generally speaking, and there may be some variations, there are three basic ways to price a home. Okay. The first way is you want to price it high. You want to price it, second is price it high or price it, at the lower end of the range, what we call demand-based pricing. So every home has a price range. There's no fixed number. All right. And where you position your property within the range is really the most consequential decision in the entire selling process. And the agents who understand this distinction consistently outperform those who don't. And that's really what we're going to talk about, the three ways to do it. So, first of all, let's talk about the truth about pricing. There is no single correct price for a home. Who knows what the house is worth? All right. There's a range. Every property falls in terms of a market range. It's this band, it's a reasonable value, a band of reasonable values that are shaped by real data and real conditions. So understanding that range is the foundation of every sound pricing decision. And here's how you know that what I'm saying is true. If you ask 20 real estate agents what an individual house is worth, you're going to get 20 different opinions. If you went out and asked 20 more real estate appraisers what that same house is worth, you're going to get 20 opinions. Who's right? Okay. We don't know what's right. But what we generally agree on is what the price range is, right? And the price range is driven by comparable sales data, which is basically closed transactions, which is way more important than active listings. So a lot of sellers figure out their range based on what's actively listed, not what's sold, even the stuff that's been on the market for 200 days. You've got buyer demand. How many qualified buyers are actively searching in the market? And that's really hard to gauge at any one time. But you can see that in the number of saves and the number of activity that you're getting and how fast properties are moving. And then you've got the different market conditions. So there are seasonal trends, there's interest rates, there's local inventory fluctuations. You got all that going for you. And so what we want to really do is we want to figure out a price range. So when you're preparing for a listing presentation or you're preparing to have a conversation about price with an individual seller, you shouldn't be thinking about the number. You should be thinking about the range. Does that make sense? And so the range is really kind of what sets you up. So let's look at the three different things. So what we're talking about is the range. So for today's example, I'm using a $500,000 house, and we're going to call the range 475 to 525. Okay. And so there are three ways to go about it. Number one is pricing high. So pricing above market value with the intent to leave room for negotiation sounds super logical, especially to the seller. But the data tells a different story. Overpriced homes consistently underperform, often selling for less than they would have had they had the right price from the very first day. And the reason for that is when you look at the slide is that when you price high, you're going to get fewer showings, you're going to get extended days on market, you're going to get repeated price reductions, and the buyers are going to perceive the home is overpriced, or worse, they're going to perceive that there's something wrong with the house. And here's the real truth that everybody's got to reckon with is that the number one thing that deteriorates or diminishes a home's perceived value is days on market, not price reductions, not condition of the house. The number one thing that diminishes the perceived value of a home is days on market. And you want to avoid accumulating days on market at all costs. Because when you have higher days on market, the listing becomes stale. Buyers lose interest and move on. The final sale price is often below true market value. Why does that happen? How is that possible? Because when you think if you got a house that's 90 or 120 days on the market and you're not getting any offers. And you see this happen in the MLS all the time. They finally get a showing, they finally get an offer, probably from an investor who's looking specifically for these 90 to 120-day old houses. And they end up getting an offer and they just look at each other like, it's the only offer we've gotten and we need to take it. And the problem wasn't that's what the house is now worth. The problem is that they didn't stimulate enough activity in order to get the house sold for a fair market price, or better yet, at the high end of market range. You lose days on market, causes the leverage to shift from the seller to the buyer. And that's really the scenario that you're trying to avoid. The next scenario is pricing right at the market, whatever that means. Remember, so where is the market? Again, there's not a market price, there's a range. All right. And so when we say I'm pricing it right at market, well, that's one agent's opinion, your opinion. If you ask five other agents, you might get a different opinion. Who's right? I don't know. All right. And so this is one of the reasons that I say is that my job is not to figure out what your house is going to sell for. My job is to sell it for the highest possible price. And that's a difference in thinking. That's a difference in the communication. We're not trying to figure out how much the house is going to sell for. And we're not representing what the house is going to sell for. We're simply trying to figure out how to sell it for the highest possible price. And so when you price directly at the comparable value, which is the most common approach we see, it's going to produce predictable average results, and that's fine. It's not a bad strategy at all, but it rarely unlocks the full potential of the market. And that's the difference between trying to sell it for where the market is and trying to sell it for a record price and trying to sell it for the most amount of money the market is going to bear. Safe and predictable is not the same as optimal. When we're pricing where the market is, we can expect that the sale is going to be approximately a market value price, nothing more, nothing less. There's limited urgency. There's no buyer competition to speak of. There's no, mechanism to push the price above list. It's the path of least resistance, but it leaves the potential value unrealized. And what we're trying to do in most cases is use the scenario called demand pricing. And demand pricing is really not pricing it under market value. Demand pricing is really about pricing it at the lower end of the range. We have this range. We want to be priced inside this range. We want to be at the lower end of the range. It is a deliberate strategic decision to price at the lower end of market range in order to maximize the buyer exposure and generate competitive bidding. The goal isn't to sell low. We're not taking a $500,000 house and listing at 475 with a goal of selling to 475. They don't need us to do that. The objective is take the $500,000 house where the comps are, offer it the low end of the range at 475 and give us a chance to sell it for over 500, maybe $525,000. It creates an environment where people are negotiating, where you got multiple buyers competing and negotiating up to pay the highest possible price for the home. And if for whatever reason, say in Steven's scenario that he gave us, where you've got a seller that really needs 640, they allowed him to price it at the low end of the range at 600. He's got an offer for 610, I think, and 615. Maybe he'll get them to come up. But at the end of the day, just because you didn't get 640 doesn't mean the strategy failed. What it did was it identified what the actual market range of the house is worth. And the only way to know what the actual value of the house is based on real offers. Does that make sense? The market determines what the value is. We don't determine what the value is. It doesn't matter how much we need. It doesn't matter how much we paid. It doesn't matter how much we updated the house. It doesn't matter how much we love it. It doesn't matter how long we've been there. None of that matters. The only thing that matters is a buyer willing to pay to acquire that house right now. That's market value. It's not determined based on from an agent. It's not determined based on an appraiser. In fact, here's a little known fact. Most of us think that appraisers set the value. When an appraiser goes out to appraise a house, they're not determining the value, they're affirming value. That's why 95% of appraisals come in at value. It's not because you nailed it. It's because they're just playing it safe. They're just confirming for the bank that it's okay to lend money based on this valuation. That's all they're doing. If it's high, they will try to justify getting it there. But at the end of the day, they're there to protect the bank's interest and to just affirm for the bank that this purchase price is not out of whack. They are not setting the value of that property. Again, even an appraiser, when they prepare the appraisal, are giving it to you in terms of a range. If you ever look at the appraisals, they give you a range of values and then they take an average of those ranges and that's what they say the value is. Have you noticed that? Look at one of the appraisals. That's what we're doing. And that's really all we're doing as well. We're looking at a range of comps and we're kind of figuring out around the averages. And then we're adjusting it higher or lower based on condition and location and view and other factors. But those adjustments all by themselves are subjective as well. So we never really know until the house is sold what the actual value of the house is. And so when we use demand-based pricing, we're not pricing it low, we're pricing at the lower end of the range. And we're driving high showing activity. Why? Why are we getting high show activity? Because if you think about how buyers are shopping for a house, if they're looking for properties between 475 and 525, say, if that's where they're looking at properties and they see all these $500,000 houses and they say, we want to go look at them, and they see a 475 house, they see the house at the lower end of the range, the only purpose of pricing is to get them to say, hey, honey, let's go look at this one too. We want to make sure that your house, our listing is included in the list of properties that they're going to go out and see. And so that's really the mission, is to get people to do it. And when you get more showings, you get more offers. And those offers create competition that actually drives the price up. So even when a seller says, I want $500,000, everything that happens after that, what's the best strategy to get $500,000? Even if the seller's price is right where the comps are, the conversation on pricing is really not about pricing it low or pricing it high. It's really about what strategy is going to get the desired result for your client. That's really what we're talking about. So let's talk a little bit about buyer psychology. So understanding how buyers make decisions is critical to understanding why demand-based pricing works. Buyers don't purchase on spreadsheets. They're not looking, at the comps. They purchase on a feeling, and then they use logic to justify the decision they've already made emotionally. And so the reason you want them in the right house, the reason that I say the purpose of all marketing is to get people in the front door, is because we're not trying to sell the house over the internet. We're not trying to set expectations over the internet. The only thing that we're trying to do when we list a house is to drive traffic through that front door. Because when people walk into the door, the sale is made. The decision to purchase or not to purchase is very often made in the first few moments after stepping in the house. People have a visceral emotional reaction to walking into a house. The range is ooh, or it's ah, right? Have you ever had this feeling? I mean, you women probably more so than men, but the house either talks to you, it either communicates with it, you're either feeling it or you're not feeling it. You know what I mean, everybody? You either feel the house or you don't. It either speaks to you or it doesn't. And if it does, and you have an emotional connection to the house, that is what drives the decision to buy, because at the end of the day, you're buying based on emotion and you're justifying how much you're going to pay based on logic. And so the showing is going to create the emotion, and they're going to quickly project their lives into the space, building the emotional connection that logic struggles to override. Just tell somebody they can't have it, it makes them want it more in most cases. And then that competition, especially when you've condensed the showings over a 4-day period, like we try to do with the 10-day strategy, and they see that there's a lot of demand, they see that there's a lot of activity, and they hear that other people are writing offers and doing multiple showings. It is that competition that creates the urgency, that gives you the leverage in order to provide the additional logic to get people to do more than they want because emotionally they've made the decision to purchase and now they just need the logic to do it. As long as they can justify their decision to go. Now, there are limits. Sometimes there are many people that want to do more. They just can't. They're limited based on their approval. They're limited based on the amount of cash that they have. There are situations where they just can't do more, but they will go up to their limit. People will stretch to get the house they love. In the urgency, when there's scarcity, urgency, and fear of loss, it drives buyers to do two things that are critically important to the negotiation. It really is where you leverage these emotions in order to get the best result for your client because the scarcity, urgency, and fear of loss, particularly the fear of loss, gets people to do two things: write their offer fast and write it for more money than they expected. The market isn't deciding what the value of the house is based on the list price. The list price is causing the market to say, let's go see that house. Once they see the house and they love it and they look at the comps, they can justify a higher price and they make a market value offer. They settle on where the market is. So the most common, objection that people have, particularly sellers have to demand-based pricing, the question is, are we leaving money on the table? And that question is based on a fundamental misunderstanding about how pricing actually works. Pricing lower does not cap the final sale price. Guys, you cannot underprice a house. It is impossible to underprice a house. If you underprice a house, the market will bid it up. But if you overprice it, it will sit on the market until it becomes properly priced. That's the way the market works. List price is simply the starting point. It is not the ceiling. One of the questions that I ask home sellers is I try to get them to put themselves in one bucket. I said, listen, my clients that I work with generally are in two camps. Camp number one is that they're only selling if they can get a certain price. So if your price is $525,000, so the question is, are you only selling if you can get this $525,000 price you said you want? Or are you pricing at $525,000 because that's the price that you think you're going to get the most amount of money? So are you selling only if you get $525,000? Or are you just trying to figure out what the high end of market value is so you can sell it at the most amount of money the market will bear so that you're confident you didn't leave any money on the table? Which camp are you in? I've asked that question hundreds of times to sellers, and almost every time, there have been a few exceptions, but almost every time they're saying, yeah, we just really want to make sure that we're not leaving any money on the table. And I think that's universally true. And so nobody wants to leave money on the table. And so when we explain how the pricing works, it's important to keep that in mind. The real risk here isn't pricing too low. The real risk is pricing too high. So overpriced homes reduce showing activity from the start. You get a slow erosion of buyer interest within the first 10 days. Price reductions then signal desperation and lowers the perceived value of the home, resulting in the house very often selling for less than what it could have sold for had it been properly priced from the beginning. This is the real risk. The list price is simply a strategy to sell it for the highest price. It's a positioning tool. It signals value and creates buyer urgency. We want buyers clamoring to buy it. We want to make it the hot new property on the market. It's basically an invitation to act. Motivated buyers are going to schedule showings right out of the gate. That's why we get so many showings so fast. Now, one of the most overlooked benefits of demand-based pricing is the dramatic increase in online search visibility. Remember, the purpose of online search, the purpose of the MLS, the purpose of syndication to thousands of websites and make it easier to find is the visibility. But remember, we are not trying to sell the house over the internet. We are not asking people to look at the pictures and send us an offer. We want them in the house. Just like when you go to buy a new car, the car salesperson all but insists that you drive it first because they know that when you drive it, you will be emotionally connected to it and they can get you to defy your logic. You walk in with a game plan. Okay, and then in all business, like you drive the car one more time. Let's make sure it's the right car. That's a ploy. They'd rather skip the driving the car as well. You fall in love, you get emotionally connected, and your game plan goes out the window, and you leave paying more for that car than you were determined not to pay. Does it happen to anybody? Okay, if you bought more than a couple of cars, it probably did. Selling houses is not that much different. So here's the thing that you've got to understand, and this is where we get into our conversations that we often have about price buckets, and that is most buyers are searching within price brackets. And a strategically lower price can appear in multiple search ranges simultaneously, reaching buyers that would never have seen the home otherwise. So most search visibility means more eyes on the listing. More eyes lead to more showings attract more offers, and more offers create the competitive pressure that pushes the final price up, often above the original market value estimate. Demand pricing doesn't limit what the market will pay. It invites the market to speak, and the market will almost always speak with a higher price. And so look, if you've got a house that's worth $500,000. So that puts the range 5% on either side, right? 5% below, 5% above. So the range is 470 to 525. Now, any guess on what it's going to sell for is only educated. You've got a range 475 to 525. Our job is to figure out how to sell it for the highest price. So if you price it at 475, look what happens. That house is going to appear in a price search for 450 to 475. It's going to appear in the price search for 450 to 500. It's going to appear in the price search from 475 to 525. That's going to increase your visibility. If I've got a $500,000 house, that's where the market is, and I price it at 510 or 525 to leave room for negotiation. Everybody that's looking for that house up to $500,000 isn't even going to see it. The lower in the range we price it, the more buyers that we're going to reach. And even if they end up making an offer that's not competitive because they're capped out at 475. So we attract a 475 buyer trying to sell it at 500. We get a buyer that's already maxed out. That's all they can do, but they're going to stretch because they love the house. You get a $475,000 offer, and then you get another one for 500, and then you get another one for 510. That $475,000 offer has value to your seller because it increases the leverage. And just like Don was saying in his win today, you take the low offer and you use it to leverage the higher offers to pay more using that scarcity, urgency, and fear of loss. That's how it works. The more offers you have, the more leverage you have. Even if you have offers from people that are not going to be able to buy that property, they still add to your leverage. They still give you an advantage over working with a single buyer. If you're negotiating with a single buyer and that buyer knows that they're their only buyer, they're negotiating down from list price, just like buying a car. But if there are multiple buyers, everybody knows they're negotiating up from list price. The question is, how high is high going to be? So you're going to get the increased visibility, drives more showings and offers, and it creates competitive pressure that pushes the prices above market value. That's the objective. All right. You're going to get 3 times more search. You're going to get more showings, and you're going to get a final higher sale price. The market is going to determine the price. This is the universal truth. You know, maybe the most important truth in real estate pricing is that neither the agent or the seller is going to determine the final price. Okay, we have an idea. I mean, sellers in particular can be pretty vocal about what they want and why they want it and why that's important and justify it a whole number of ways that don't make any sense logically. The market, though, is going to determine what the value of the house is. Buyers, competition, and demand are the true price-setting forces. And the job of a pricing strategy, the job of a listing agent is to leverage pricing strategy to unleash those forces in the seller's favor. We represent the seller. Our job is to get them the highest possible price the market will bear. Even if they're saying they want 550, if the most the market is going to do is 525, the best way to justify them taking 525 is giving them multiple offers, 510, 515, 525, and explaining this is the value of your house based on multiple offers. Your options are to accept one of these offers or to hope that you get a better offer. And maybe over the next 2 or 3 years, the market will come to you and you'll be able to get that price. But market value is determined by offers. This is the range of market value determined by multiple offers. It gives the seller the logic to make a well-informed decision. So look, when you're pricing a home, there are only two possible outcomes. Every pricing decision puts the seller on one of these two paths, and the difference in the results can be significant. Okay? You can chase the market. If you want to chase the market, you list too high from the start. You limit your showing activity, which then further declines. Price reduction signal weakness to buyers, extended days on market erode perceived value, and then the final sale price is often below market value or where it should have sold had it been properly priced from the beginning. Or you can create demand. You can get the market chasing you, where list price is generating immediate buyer interest, where you're getting strong showing activity from day one, where you get multiple offers that come in at the same time so that you've got competitive pressure that creates the scarcity, urgency, and fear of loss, where buyers are competing, where they're negotiating up from list price to pay the highest possible price, where the final sale price is at or above where the comps are. And that should be the goal of every pricing conversation, is to set the seller up so that the market is chasing the listing and so they don't leave any money on the table, not the other way around. And if you're letting sellers dictate the price based on what they hope and what they feel and what they can justify, that's not the right way to go about it. Now, listen, I want to make one thing clear before I end this, and that is if a customer needs $525,000, I'm not telling them they can't get 525 because that's in the range. The best chance of getting 525 is using the right price strategy. All I'm saying, the best way to get 525 is not to list it at 550 or to list it at 525. The best way to get 525 is to list it at 500. The market has proven that over and over and over and over again by doing that. That's not pricing it low. That's pricing it smart. Figuring out what the range is, pricing at the low end of the range, inducing competition, inducing competitive bids, and getting buyers competing to pay the highest possible price for the house. And when I talk to a seller about listing their house at 500,000, I am super clear with them to know that the objective is 525. We're simply having a conversation on the strategy we're going to use to do it. And I further explain to them that if you need 525, all right, and we do this strategy and we don't get you an offer of $525,000 or more, don't sell it. Don't sell it. I am not going to make you sell a house for a price that you don't agree to. My job is not to tell you what you want to hear, not to figure out what it's going to sell for, but to sell it for the highest possible price and get you multiple offers so that you can know precisely where the range is, because multiple offers determine what the price range is. And then you maintain the final decision over whether or not you're going to take the offers that are on the table or wait and see if the market comes to you over the next couple of years. All right. So I hope that overview is helpful. So which strategy is right for your client? All right. Well, which is riskiest? Ask yourself this. Ask your client this. What's the riskier way to go? Start with a high price where you have low buyer interest, days on market erode perceived value, price reduction signal desperation, often sells below true market value, and seller negotiates from a position of weakness. Which is the riskiest strategy? Pricing it high or pricing it right? Pricing it at the low end of the range. Attracts maximum buyer attention from day one. Creates competitive bidding. Urgency drives offers above list price. Buyers compete against one another. And the final price is determined by the market, not by the agent, not by the seller, not by the appraiser. Pricing high feels safe, but the data consistently shows that demand-based pricing outperforms every other strategy by a long shot. And don't forget one big advantage to you, okay? When you sell houses fast, when you exceed seller expectations, a couple of good things. Number one, the faster you sell houses, the more money you make per hour and the more time you have to do more transactions. And number two, That wow factor, that's what drives the 5-star reviews. That's what drives repeat and referral business. And there is no better way to leverage one listing and turn it into a second or third transaction by creating a result where you exceeded the seller's expectation by selling it fast with multiple offers above where the market said the house should have sold for. And that's what happens every single time you execute this strategy properly.